A cutthroat billionaire shows up ready to ruin his own son's life, only to be completely shut down by a simple cup of tea from his poor country mother-in-law. What in the world is going down on this misty hill? Welcome back to the channel, our amazing listeners. Picking up right where we left off with that suffocating cliffhanger in the last episode, James just dropped his ultimate trump card, one worth an entire family empire. Dad, you're going to be a grandfather. Faced with his own flesh and blood heir, will the ruthless chairman keep pushing them to the edge, or will his wall of cold, hard pride finally crumble? You guys are definitely going to get goosebumps with the most spectacular and emotional plot twist we've seen so far. Hold your breath, and let's dive right into today's episode. Dad, you're going to be a grandfather. James's voice rang out clear and resolute, slicing through the thick, misty night air. The words, "going to be a grandfather," struck Chairman Hoan's mind not like a deafening thunderclap, but like a deep, solemn temple bell, resonating and powerful enough to send a terrifying shockwave that squeezed his very soul. The space instantly plunged into an eerie, chilling silence. Even the chirping of the insects hiding beneath the oak leaves seemed to fall dead silent. The night wind stopped. The mist drifting across the porch seemed to freeze under the invisible pressure radiating from the three people standing beneath the dim yellow light. Chairman Hoan remained motionless on the woven rattan chair. His back was perfectly straight, his hands resting on the armrests, maintaining an aura of absolute authority. Yet, behind that flawless exterior, a massive earthquake was sweeping through every nerve of the powerful man. His eyes, usually as sharp and cold as a razor, now flickered with undeniable shock. His gaze slowly slid from James's hardened face down to Diep's stomach, hidden beneath a thick woolen sweater. Right there, a new life was growing, a bloodline of the Hoan family, a true heir. Chairman Hoan's silver-flecked eyebrows knitted tightly together. His breathing, though he tried to suppress it, grew noticeably heavier. He slowly looked up, meeting his son's chiseled face again. Under the light, James's bloodshot, exhausted eyes burned with an ultimate, unyielding fire, the fire of a man who would rather be torn to pieces and throw away the entire world than take a single step back from protecting his wife and child. For a brief moment, the proud, icy wall that Chairman Hoan had painstakingly built with wealth, power, and ruthlessness over decades suddenly formed a long crack. Seeing James spread his broad arms, standing in the line of fire to shield that fragile woman, it looked so much like himself back in the day. Memories from 30 years ago suddenly rushed back. He remembered the afternoon he hurriedly walked out of a do-or-die negotiation. Back then, he wasn't a terrifying chairman. He was just an ambitious man working himself to the bone to build his career, fighting tooth and nail for a foothold in a cutthroat business world. Ignoring his sweat-soaked suit, he had rushed like a madman to the hospital. The moment he looked at the tiny red newborn named James lying in the crib, reaching out a tiny hand to grasp his own rough finger, that hardened man had shed a tear. He swore to use his life, to use any means necessary to build the greatest empire for this child. He wanted to elevate him above everyone else, ensuring that no one in this world would ever dare look down on him or disrespect him. And he did it. He gave James wealth, power, and the most prestigious schools. But the price was too steep. The empire he built swallowed his time, turning him into a cold-blooded man who only cared about numbers and contracts. His wife, James's mother, couldn't bear the crushing loneliness inside her own gilded mansion. She chose to leave, opting for a divorce to find the simple peace he could never give her. And now, 30 years later, here he was. Look at what he was doing. His own suffocating control was repeating the tragedy of the past. He was backing his son into a corner, killing their father-son bond. And tonight, he almost robbed his own grandchild of the chance to be born without even knowing it. Was he really a failure as a father, just like Diep had said? On the other side, James held Diep's hand tightly, their fingers intertwined with no space between them. He could feel her palms sweating profusely, but her shoulders didn't shrink back. Diep breathed evenly, her eyes staring straight at Chairman Hoan. The instinct of a mother-to-be had transformed the girl who once hid in her insecure shell into a tough, resilient weed. Just as the tension peaked, tight as a guitar string about to snap, the crunching sound of footsteps on the gravel slowly broke the silence. James and Diep startled and turned around. From the dark corner of the yard where the SUV was parked, Diep's mother slowly walked over. She had hastily thrown on a worn-out wool coat, her grayish hair clipped loosely at the back of her neck, blowing in the misty wind. Perhaps the screeching brakes earlier, combined with the suffocating pressure on the porch, had woken her up. "Mom!" Diep cried out, her voice a mix of heartache and sheer panic. Her heart clenched. She could endure all the bitter insults and humiliation from Chairman Hoan, but she couldn't let her mother, a woman who had lived a life of hardship, listen to the contempt of this almighty, powerful man. She started to step forward to stop her mother, wanting to hide her behind her back. But contrary to James and Diep's fears, she didn't show any panic or fear, nor did she bristle with anger like a mother hen protecting her chicks. She stepped up the wooden stairs with the calm, slow, and steady demeanor of a woman who had weathered too many storms and tasted all the bitterness life had to offer. She walked right past Diep, gently patting James on the shoulder as a silent reassurance. "Don't worry, Mom is here." Then, she casually stepped right through the kid's solid defensive wall, heading straight for the precious ebony tea table where the most terrifying man in the city was sitting. Chairman Hoan frowned slightly. His eyes reeled in the earlier shock, instantly shifting to a condescending, calculating, and highly guarded look as he watched the worn-out old mother approach him. Assistant Tran, standing by the corner pillar, instinctively reached inside his suit jacket, ready to intervene if she tried anything crazy. But Diep's mother didn't do a thing. She didn't yell, blame, or tearfully beg. She reached out her thin hands, lined with blue veins and rough calluses from years of hard work, and unhurriedly lifted the lid off the clay teapot on the table. Slowly, she poured a stream of steaming, clear, golden tea into a brand-new porcelain cup resting on a small saucer. The trickling sound of the water in the dead of night sounded strangely serene. The steam rose from the tea, carrying the delicate scent of young leaves, chasing away the bone-chilling cold of the midnight mist. She carefully picked up the porcelain cup with both hands, gently placed it on the table, and slid it over to Chairman Hoan. "The mist on the hill is freezing tonight. Please, Chairman, have a cup of tea to warm up." Her voice rang out, gentle, calm, and rustic. There wasn't a hint of resentment or envy, nor was there an ounce of groveling or flattery. It was simply the welcoming gesture of a woman who was the master of her own home. Chairman Hoan glanced at the steaming teacup. His gaze moved up to her rough hands, then stared straight into the crow's feet framing Diep's mother's eyes. He remained silent, the air around him still radiating a freezing, unapproachable chill. Diep's mother let out a very soft sigh. She stood up straight, clasping her hands loosely in front of her stomach. Her kind eyes swept over James's broad back and Diep's trembling shoulders, and finally she directed all her sincerity toward the powerful man sitting on the rattan chair. "To be honest with you, back when Diep first told me about your family background, I was terrified of you," she began slowly, her rustic words heavy with deep thought and a heartbreaking sincerity. "I'm just a country mother. I don't have much education. I was scared of your overwhelming power. I was scared of the way you use money and cold, hard numbers to dictate the lives, the worth, and the happiness of my daughter." She gave a small, sad smile that carried a sense of resignation. "I used to doubt James's feelings for Diep. I even purposely said harsh things to him when he came to our house looking for her. It wasn't because I hated him, but because I knew your glamorous, luxurious, yet ruthless world was far too cold for my poor little girl. I'd rather let her live a simple life, scraping by meal, than have her step into a gilded cage only to be trampled until she had no dignity left." Hearing her mother's words, Diep couldn't hold back her tears. She covered her mouth with her hands, muffling her choked sobs. James tightened his grip around her waist, letting her rest her head fully against his solid chest. Diep's mother paused for a moment. She turned to look at James. Her eyes filled with pity and compassion as she saw his sunken eye sockets, the bloodshot streaks, and his rumpled clothes, proof of a crazy, reckless love that defied everything. But today, when I saw James, an almighty CEO, an heir, willing to throw it all away and drag himself everywhere just to find my Diep, I suddenly realized I was wrong. She turned her head back, looking straight into Chairman Hoan's eyes. There was no more timidity in her gaze. Instead, it shone brightly with empathy. "And Chairman, I'm afraid you are wrong too." Chairman Hoan's hand on the armrest tightened slightly. His knuckles turned a bit white. A complex flash of irritation crossed his eyes, but some invisible force pinned him to the chair, preventing him from interrupting. For the first time in his 60 years of life, the authoritative chairman, the man who called all the shots in the business world, actually sat quietly and listened to a poor woman lecture him. "You built a massive corporation. You pull all the strings, but ultimately, your deepest goal is to leave it behind for your descendants, to make your family legacy last forever, right?" Diep's mother kept her forgiving smile. It wasn't a smile of pity, but the smile of someone who had grasped the true value of life. "But you've forgotten a very basic truth about human life. When a child is born, it has absolutely no idea how many millions the contract on your desk is worth. It doesn't care if the bed it sleeps in is plated with gold or lined with straw. All it needs is to know whose hands are holding it, keeping it warm when it cries in the middle of the night. It needs to know who will patiently teach it to say Dad, and who will smile, pick it up, and call himself Grandpa during its early years." Diep's mother reached out, pointing at Diep, who was leaning against James's chest, her tears soaking a patch of his shirt. Her voice dropped, choked and trembling with emotion. "Look at the kids. Look at the way he's holding Diep so tightly. They don't need your money. All they need is a peaceful home, a hot meal with both husband and wife at the table after a long day of work. You and I, we're both parents. We've almost walked to the end of our life's journey. We can't take our money to the grave. Please, just let go of this obsession with power. Let the kids live their own lives. Let them have this little piece of love they had to trade their blood and tears for." The space sank into silence once again, but this time, it wasn't the suffocating, oppressive tension from before. It was a serene, profound stillness steeped in humanity. The rustling of the oak leaves sounded like the synchronized sighs of nature. Diep's mother's rustic, sincere words, poured straight from her heart, acted like an invisible blade, smooth yet incredibly sharp. It pierced through every layer of defense, entirely stripping away Chairman Hoan's cold steel armor of power. He sat there, stunned. A man who always used lifeless numbers and money to measure everything was now sitting in front of a country mother, listening to her speak of things so simple yet so profound. Compared to her boundless, selfless maternal love, the father-son bond he had built on manipulation and coercion suddenly felt twisted, grotesque, and incredibly pathetic. A deep, gnawing sense of underlying shame involuntarily welled up in the chairman's chest. His chest heaved. Chairman Hoan slowly pulled back his gaze. His usual sharp, ruthless demeanor vanished, leaving only the exhaustion of an old man who had just gone through a fierce internal struggle. He looked down at the steaming cup of tea on the ebony table. After a long while, he reached out his age-spotted hands, picked up the cup, brought it to his lips, and drank it in one sip. The bitter astringency of the wild forest tea hitting his tongue made him frown slightly. But almost instantly, a warm, pure, sweet aftertaste slowly spread down his throat, thawing a heart that had been frozen for so long. He set the teacup down on the saucer. Clink. The sound this time was clear, no longer dry and carrying the oppressive killing intent it had when he first arrived. The chairman's gaze shifted from Diep's mother's weathered but serene face to Diep's red, teary eyes, and once again lingered for a long time on her stomach, hidden beneath the sweater. "The tea is very warm. Thank you," Chairman Hoan's deep voice spoke up. For the first time in his life, the authoritative chairman lowered his voice. He didn't use his commanding tone, but instead conveyed a deep, unspoken respect for the poor woman sitting across from him. He turned to look at his son, letting out a soft sigh. The authority of a leader was still present on his broad shoulders, but the ruthlessness and the defensive walls had completely crumbled, shattering into 100 pieces under the moonlight. "You were right, James. My whole life, I've calculated every single move in the business world, never leaving a single loophole. But in the end, I miscalculated the most important variable." He paused for a beat, his voice dropping to a whisper as he looked up at the vast expanse of the night sky. Flesh and blood. He slowly took a half step forward. Seeing his father move, James instinctively tightened his grip, pulling Diep back behind him. But Chairman Hoan just raised his hand slightly, a very gentle stopping gesture, signaling him to hold on. He stopped looking at James and shifted his sharp, contemplative gaze straight to the small girl nestled against his son's chest. "You win," Chairman Hoan said loudly, every word clear and echoing in the quiet space. The chairman's admission of defeat carried no bitterness. It was genuine respect. Not because that torn-up contract was ripped to shreds, nor because of this romanticized love you two hallucinate about, but because tonight you showed me. You have the courage, the resilience, and the guts to stand tall and face the storm to protect the bloodline of this family. Diep was stunned. Her entire body went numb. Her clear eyes widened to the max and hot tears burst forth, rolling down her cheeks and dropping onto the back of James's hand. Her hand gripped his so tightly her nails dug into his skin, as if she didn't dare believe the words she had just heard. Chairman Hoan slowly turned around. The hem of his dark gray wool trench coat fluttered lightly in the misty wind, carrying an air of solitude, yet an incredible sense of peace. He took slow, steady strides toward the car waiting with its engine running in the corner of the yard. Assistant Tran, who had been holding his breath by the car door the whole time, his face still reeling from the cold-blooded chairman's shocking change of heart, hurriedly bowed his head and reached out to open the door. Just before his heel stepped onto the car's running board, Chairman Hoan stopped. He rested his hand on the roof of the car. Turning his head slightly, he tossed a sentence toward the porch. It sounded like his usual bossy, commanding tone, but hidden deep inside was the rough, clumsy, and surprisingly endearing care of a powerful man becoming a grandfather for the first time. Tomorrow morning, pack your bags and bring Diep and her mother back to the city. My grandchild cannot be born and raised in a desolate wooden cabin full of drafts and freezing mist like this. Hearing that, James turned slightly to look at Diep. The small girl wiped her tears and smiled gently, her fingers squeezing his hand in place of all the words she wanted to say. James looked up, staring straight at his father's imposing back, and spoke in a warm but firm voice. "Dad, we want to stay here a little while longer." Chairman Hoan frowned slightly, stopping in his tracks and turning all the way around. The air on this tea hill is very fresh, quiet, and away from the smog, which is great for Diep's first few months of pregnancy, James continued, his eyes shining with simple sincerity. After all the storms we've been through, she needs some peace and quiet to truly rest and nurture the baby. I want to use this time to build a crib with my own hands, light the stove to cook for her, and take care of her to make up for the days that have passed. Once the baby gets a bit bigger and the due date is close, we'll come back. A brief silence passed. The night wind softly whistled through the rustling oak trees. Chairman Hoan looked deep into his son's calm eyes, then over at Diep's face, which had lost its haggard look and now held a trace of tenderness. He understood that the kids needed time to comfort each other, to heal the wounds he himself had dug so deep. His son was now truly a mature man, knowing when to step back and how to play the long game to protect his little family. The very last bit of stubbornness in the chairman's heart finally surrendered. "It's up to you kids." He paused slightly. His eyes swept over their tightly intertwined hands, and he cleared his throat softly, as if to hide the clumsy embarrassment of a father. "I think you kids should prepare for a wedding." With that, he turned and stepped into the car. The door shut with a solid thud. The pitch-black SUV slowly rolled forward, parting the mist as it backed down the gravel slope and vanished into the quiet night. The glowing red taillights faded away, taking with them all the heaviness and gloom of the past few months, leaving behind only the sheer amazement and bursting happiness of the three people standing under the porch. Under the bright golden moonlight, James looked down at Diep. The heart of a man who had survived countless battles in the business world was now pounding like a teenage boy in love for the first time. He wrapped his arms completely around his little girl, burying his face in the crook of her neck, greedily breathing in her familiar scent. Diep wrapped her arms around his waist, a happy tear rolling down her cheek and soaking a patch of his messy dress shirt. The fiercest battle of his life was finally over, ending in an unexpectedly perfect way. Well, guys, that stormy night on Oak Hill has finally come to an end with the most perfect and emotionally explosive conclusion. We've been through so many suffocating moments with James and Diep, the running away, the hiding, and the heartbreaks that seemed impossible to heal. But today, Diep's bravery, James's fierce determination to throw away the world to protect his family, and especially the deep, forgiving grace of Diep's mother, created an absolute miracle. A warm cup of tea in the freezing night didn't just melt away Chairman Hoan's hostility, it awakened the father-son bond that had been buried under a shell of power for 30 years. Chairman Hoan's concession, that proud turn to get in the car while leaving behind a promise for a proper, official wedding, is the clearest proof that when it comes to your own flesh and blood, all the power and money in the business world mean absolutely nothing. Now that cold, misty hill has truly become a peaceful, sun-filled home. Diep's upcoming recovery time right next to an ex-CEO trying his hand at being a stay-at-home husband, digging up dirt and planting veggies, is guaranteed to bring us some incredibly sweet and healing moments. How will this young couple's leaving the city for the woods lifestyle play out? And just how spectacular will the super wedding promised by Chairman Hoan actually be? Which quote in today's episode hit you the hardest or impressed you the most? Diep's fierce transformation or Chairman Hoan's shocking change of heart? Let me know your thoughts and feelings down in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you ring that notification bell so you can be the first to catch the sweet romantic episodes coming up next. Thank you guys so much for always sticking with us. Wishing you all a joyful and peaceful day.